What's on the section I'm going to ask for your religion?
Okay, right. So we are back at it here with this is sort of the second bit of preparations for taking the land, because if you remember from last week and subsequent discussions about Joshua, we're talking about taking the land, which is a picture of Christian maturity, coming in and developing and being better than what you were, and so the the Israelites had to be prepared to do this. There was pre-planning, there was preparation, and we talked much about that last week and all about the gathering of the 12 stones out of the Jordan, and how there wasn't just the 12 stones that were taken to the other side, but there was also the 12 stones that remained in the midst of the Jordan, and each represented the 12 tribes of Israel. And we talked through a lot of those types of things. So now we're going to be talking about Joshua 5 and 6, which is kind of everybody's favorite part of the book of Joshua, which is getting into the taking of Jericho. And oftentimes we talk about it as the Battle of Jericho. It wasn't a battle. It was a faith exercise that resulted in the taking of Jericho. But I'd say, yes, there were people that were killed, but it wasn't a battle. All right. So, but again, there's preparations that Joshua has to go through. And I think today's discussion will be quite instructive in terms of how this is going to go. Anyway, right. I thought I had this just going to drizzle down. But anyway, this is what happens. Okay. We'll just read through Joshua 5, 8 through 12 here, which is the first part of this. Hello. All right. There's a chair just for you. So you just sit there and mind yourself. And well, you're lucky because we just started, really. So, yeah. So it says in verse 8, and so it was when they had finished circumcising all the people that they stayed in their places in the camp until they were healed. And then the Lord said to Joshua, this day will I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. Therefore, the name of this place shall be called Gilgal to this day. And now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight in the plains of Jericho. And they ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. And then manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land, and the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they had the food of the land of Canaan that year. So there was a number of different things that were going on. So they had just crossed the Jordan River. That's what we were talking about last week. And so they get to the other side. Now you have to realize that the generation of people that are crossing over, these are the people that were born along the way. Okay, none of these people, except for two of them, were the original people that came out of Egypt. Okay, so there was, and this happened 39 years and 364 days prior. Okay. Now the reason I say that is because of what it says here about the Passover. Okay. So anyway, but those people that were born along the way, the males were not circumcised. Okay. So and that was a sign of the covenant. That is what God had given to Abraham back in the old days as a sign. Now a lot of people would look at that and think that's a really weird sign, but it was a demonstration of the removal of uncleanliness. Okay, so and so that's what circumcision really is about in the Bible, because they talk about the circumcision of the heart, and that is the removal of sin and the removal of sinful tendencies and bad conscience and all that kind of stuff. So it's really about sanctification. Okay, so that's what this generation of Israelites, save Joshua and Caleb. They were the only two men that God permitted to come into the land of Canaan, who were the two originals that came out of Egypt. So, and that was because they believed God in the wilderness of Paran, where they were supposed to go in. They sent 12 spies, and 10 of them came back, says, no, we can't do this. Joshua and Caleb says, yes, we can. God rewarded their faithfulness and says, well, then you can go in, but these other boys aren't, and nobody else is either. So now, the thing that they then did, they stayed in their camp there until the men that were circumcised were healed. So that was anybody who was, basically just short of 40 years old on down. Okay. So dear love those men. Anyway. So, and what God had then said there was this day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. So what God wants to do in our lives is he wants to remove us from the vestiges and the old stuff. And so often what we end up doing in our Christian experience is we bring a lot of our old baggage with us. And the reason we bring our baggage is because we like our baggage. We like, it's like a little comfy blanket, so we know what it does. We know we can predict it, even though it might not be great, we still know it, and sometimes, as they say, better the devil you know than the devil you don't, So, so this is why God is saying, look, you need to be circumcised, you need to be sanctified, you need to be set apart from me, and that is going to then remove the reproach of Egypt. Don't go back to Egypt. God kept on telling them that, and yet there were people that were wanting to go back to Egypt because it was hard going. So that's why the place was called Gilgal at that particular point, was because of this idea of rolling away the reproach. So, and then they keep the Passover, it says, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight in the plains of Jericho. So this is a very significant date, because the Israelites, guess what they did when they left Egypt? That was a Passover. Okay, they ate in haste. They sacrificed the lamb. They put the blood on the door. They made unleavened bread because they didn't have time to let it rise. So they had to eat with their staff in their hand and get, and so they had to get on with it. So it was that night they crossed over that area of the Sinai Peninsula and crossed over on the Gulf of Aqaba and up the other side. So there was a lot going on in those kind of couple of days that they were taking to get to the other side. But the departure of Egypt, happened at Passover. So that's why this running up to this particular day was 39 years, 364 days. So it's 1 day shy of a year. Okay, so it wasn't 40 years exactly. Okay, it's easier to say 40 years because it's day off. But to be quite precise, it was that amount of time. So it says that they kept the Passover, and so keeping the Passover is about remembrance. So you remember how God delivered you. Don't go back to Egypt, but remember it. Remember how that took place. And they kept it exactly on the right day of the month, which was the 14th day of the month of Nisan. And undoubtedly, the way that the lunar cycles would have fell, Passover was always on a full moon. All right, so there would have been a full moon on that particular night. So, and they ate the produce of the land the day after Passover there, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. And and that's a big thing too, because they were experiencing manna from heaven for close to 40 years, So, and manna means, what is it? So they didn't know exactly what it was, other than that's what God provided, So God always provided, but now it's bigger and better things, So we're not going to be just getting spoon fed, baby porridge anymore. This is meat. This is real food. So it says there in verse 12, then the manna ceased on the day that they had eaten the produce of the land. And the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they had the food of the land of Canaan that year. So really how I look at the manna ceasing is that God's provisions are tailored to their situation. Okay. So when, you and I are, entering into the land and entering into maturity, Christian maturity, God will provide for us exactly what we need when we need it, Right. So now the next thing that happens here, so there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of new things taking place. They've crossed the Jordan, and Joshua said to them, "You've never done this before." Okay. And nor, all them people had never crossed a body of water before, because their parents did, the Red Sea, but these people hadn't. Okay. So this was a new experience, so, and, we can tell our kids in a lot of ways about, our own faith and our own experiences of faith and that kind of stuff, but they cannot piggyback on it. They don't know the experience of that. God has to take them through their own experience. So, and, for those of us that have children that are saved, and we'll continue to pray for them ones that aren't, but, for those that are saved, we know that they have done their own journey. They as they say, God does not have grandkids. Okay, so but so anyway, these people were circumcised. They experienced the Passover, which is not a new thing, but it is new in the sense that it's in the new land. And but now the manna has ceased, so that's a whole different ball of wax. And now I'm sure Joshua is going, this is all over, there's a lot going on. And when there's a lot of upheaval in your life, it stresses you out, So, I remember when I came to this country full time back in 1998, there was a lot going on. I quit my job. I got rid of my car, or two cars, and, my health went, downhill. I had, I think, about 15, 16 boxes that we packed, and, all kinds of stuff. And then having to basically move country. It's one thing to move house, but moving country is a whole different thing, and so, and I was looking at my old passport this morning, and I have to carry, when I travel, I have to carry my old passport with me, because it has my visa in it that allows me to stay here. And it is the most important document that I have in my possession, is that visa. So that's your phone. So but I was looking at it. The visa says on it, it gives a bunch of numbers, in terms of like a serial number. But it says this, it says that I am allowed to stay in the UK for an indefinite period. So now, the reason that I have that visa is for two reasons. One, I got married to a British national, meaning Elaine, so we're a British subject, however you want to call it. And I also had work. Okay, so, and it's at the instigation and really the prerogative of the British government whether I can come in or not. So that, just because I fulfill those two pieces of criteria doesn't guarantee me actually getting a visa. They have to decide and say, yes, we'll give you this stamp. And so when I actually travel, even though that particular passport is now expired, it has the visa in it. So, and if I don't have that, I don't get in.
You
Yeah.
think that they would update that to your new
Well, you can at a price.
All right.
Yeah, so it's a lot easier just to carry the old
Yeah.
passport, so it would cost, I think, £170 to have it transferred to my current passport. But the problem, I'd have to do that every 10 years. So there's no point really. So, but it's interesting when you think about those two components. I had to have a relationship with somebody who was a citizen.
Maybe Elaine's just getting you into the contract.
Well, that's what they do over on the other side. They do these marriages of convenience and all this kind of stuff. And then I had purpose. I had work. Okay. So, when you come into the kingdom of God, essentially what God does is he says, I'm going to give you a visa here. And it's because of two reasons. One, you have a relationship with me, and the other is that you have purpose. So, but it is amazing, to think, if I did not have that little square piece of green stamp paper with numbers and a signature and the insignia of the British government and all that kind of stuff, I couldn't stay here. I could get a 3-month tourist visa, but then at the end of that, I'd have to be fired back to the States. So, but it's just interesting, that God gives us a visa. He gives us a stamp, and he says, you know what, you can stay for an indefinite period in my kingdom. And that's a wonderful thing. Because we have that relationship with God through the Lord Jesus Christ, and we have that purpose that he gives us. So, anyway, Joshua then, I think, at this stage, you're going, so what do we do? What do we do? We're here, and there's this big land out there. So how are we going to take this? And so often what the people that I work with make this comment. They say, what do I need to do to change? But before you know what to do, you got to know and trust who's giving you the do. All right. So this was Joshua chapter 5. This is the last sort of few verses of this chapter. And this is what it says. And it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? So he said, no, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, what does my Lord say to his servant? And then the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, take the sandal off your foot, for the place where you stand is holy. And Joshua did so. And really this is where Joshua has an encounter with God. Now, let me just step you through some of these things here. So the first thing is Joshua looked up and saw. Okay. Words are important in the Bible, as we all know. And instead of looking at the ground and looking at, the circumstances that are around him, he goes up. He looks up, and he sees this man. Now, this is what is referred to in theology as a Christophany. Okay, it is an appearance of Christ in the Old Testament. So anytime you encounter a person in the Old Testament, oftentimes it's labeled as an angel of the Lord, or in this case, the commander of the Lord's army, something like this. But there's obviously something about this type of individual that is quite majestic, and because the Joshua fell down and he worshipped, and the worship was not rejected by this man. So because there is incidences in the Bible where, an angel presented themselves, people worshiped, and they went, nope, stop, don't be doing this because I'm not God. Okay, I'm just a servant of God like you, So so a Christophany is an appearance of Christ as the man, okay, because these are all individuals that appear in the Old Testament in this fashion. The other type of appearance of God, which would be like the burning bush, that sort of stuff, that is what is referred to as a theophany, which is an appearance of God. Okay, so Christophany is an appearance of Christ himself. Okay, so that's a fancy word. If you're at a some sort of quiz night and this kind of comes up, then you can say, oh, I know what the word Christophany means. Anyway. Okay, now what this man is doing, the commander of the Lord's army is basically saying is he is in charge and he's prepared to struggle, not necessarily physically, but spiritually. Now, I don't know about you. If I was Joshua, okay, and I see a man standing there, not just like this, okay, but he's standing there with a sword drawn and he's standing there like this. And Joshua goes up to him. I would struggle with that. I would be going, that man is holding a sword out towards me. This is not a safe situation. I would be like, hiding behind a rock or a bush or running for it, So, but the thing is that there was something safe about this man. And so Joshua goes up to him and asks him this question: are you for us or are you for them? And you know what the commander of the Lord's army said? No, on both counts. So he didn't say, yes, I'm for you, or yes, I'm for them. He said, no, I'm not on anybody's side. So he's saying, I'm the one that's in charge, not you, not them. So, and because he has this sword, that's an indication that there's going to be struggle. There's going to be battle. In order to take this land, you have to do work. You have to be prepared to get dirty. So, so the first order of business here is worship and knowing who the Lord is, because that's what Joshua. This is what he says to the man. He says, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" Notice that he doesn't say, "What does my Lord want me to do?" He says, "What do you say to me?" So, and what is then said is, "Take your sandal off your foot, for the place where you stand is holy." So the first order of business here is to worship God. So, and this happens on different occasions in the Bible where there is encounters with this appearance of Christ in the Old Testament. Is get your sandals off your feet, because and that was an ancient way of showing respect. When I was in Trinidad years ago and went to the local mosque, you had to take your shoes off your feet before you went into the mosque. It was just, that was because for them that was their holy ground, and so you showed respect. So you don't go in there cavalier and just say, no, I'm an infidel. I'm a Christian. I can do whatever I want in the mosque. No, you do show respect. And actually, what that did is that gave us great opportunity in the gospel. So with those particular people. But anyway, so that is a very ancient form of showing respect and in that sort of situation. Now, so Joshua obeyed the Lord in what was done there. And you must know and trust the guide before you can receive and know guidance. Often we get it the other way around. So, because so often what we do is we say, "Tell me what to do, and then I'll trust you, because I'll watch how this guidance pans out, and then I'll trust you as the guide." But that's not how it works with God. God says, "No, you have to trust me implicitly first. Then I'll tell you what to do, and you'll go and do it because you understand and you know me." So that's why we need to know and trust the guide first before receiving it. Because see, Joshua has no idea how to deal with Jericho. Jericho is this first monstrosity that he has to go and deal with, And, he sent spies into the thing, these two boys, and they came back and, they're all terrified. They're scared spitless of what you're going to do and might do or whatever. But, nonetheless, it's a big imposing structure that, when they cross the Jordan at that particular point just above the Red Sea, it's real down low, and then Jericho is up the cliffs and up, they're in a bit of a flat part, but, in order to get up into the land, you got to pass Jericho. There's no other way to do it. So now, so he knows the guide now. He knows who God is, and he knows that God is in charge. So what he has to do now is he has to accept the guidance. So we start here in chapter 6 and verse 1 and 5. And I find this interesting instruction. Okay. So it says, now Jericho was securely shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out, none came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, see, I've given Jericho into your hand, its king and its mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all you men of war. You shall go around the city once. You shall do this you shall do 6 days. 7 priests shall bear the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. But the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And it shall come to pass when you make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, that all the people shall shout with a great shout, and then the wall of the city shall fall down flat. And the people shall go up, every man straight before him. Now, I don't know about you, but again, I find some of this instruction not terribly wise. It's not terribly obvious, but for the man of faith, it is obvious. Yeah. So now, Joshua now knows the guide. He knows God. He knows God is in charge. And then God says to Joshua, see, I've given it to you. Now, you see the first part of or verse 1 there, it says, now Jericho was securely shut up because the children of Israel, none went in, none went out. Or none went out, none came in. So now to me, to the average Joe, to the unspiritual person, they would look at that and say, there ain't no way we're taking this. Not in a month of Sundays. So, but God says to the man of faith, who's Joshua, see, given it to you. It's obvious. So things that are not obvious to the world can be obvious to you. So, and then God gives them this instruction from verse 3 to through the verse 5 about walking around the city once every day for 6 days. And then on the 7th day, do 7 laps. And then at the end of that, shout, and the walls fall down. Now, from a strategic military sort of point of view, this is completely and utterly daft. Okay, this is nuts. This is just ludicrous. But again, sometimes God says, look to me, trust me, I know what I'm doing, and it'll work. And so, I probably have told these stories before, but when I was in university, in the Christian university a lot of years ago, there was me and a girl called Terry and a fellow called John, and we decided to walk around our campus 7 times. And we did what was called a Jericho walk. And we walked around and we prayed. And we held up placards, had written on the placards what we were doing, because Joshua had given the children of Israel instructions, don't say a word as you're marching around. So we didn't say anything. And we walked around the campus, and we had a plot of where we would walk. And it was a cold winter's day. I mean, there was snow on the ground and all this. And we walked, I think, in excess of 9 miles to go around our campus, because we wanted to make sure that we got around every building. And so as we walked, we prayed for every building. We prayed for every student in every building. We prayed for all the staff. We prayed for, and because we wanted God to move. We wanted God to break down the walls. And so we marched around, and And people came up to us and say, hey, what you doing? And so we just went, stuck a sign in their face and said, read that, and so they read it and go, oh, fair play to it, So anyway, so we did our thing, and then when we came back to the main administration building after the seventh lap, we all jumped up and down and we shouted and we said, the Lord's taken Geneva College. Now, there wasn't any great sort of fanfare. There's still a little bit of snow and flurries happening, but you see, that year, God moved. I went back to that campus in September to go and visit after 35 years, and it is vibrant for the gospel. And I remember the best thing that we went to was the choir called the Genevans, and it's an a cappella choir. And because it's Reformed Presbyterian, they don't use music, but anyway, so they sang these wonderful Christian hymns and songs and stuff, and then they invited alumni, people that were there visiting the campus who had been in the Genevan choir years gone by. They said, "Come up and sing with us," and they just, half the audience emptied and went up on the stage, and there was hundreds of them. And I remember there was a mommy, who had graduated, and then she had her kid, and she had her kid sitting, just, went up there and, so they were all up there with their children and everything. And they were just singing to the Lord and praising God. And it was, and it was not one taste of music. It was just their voices. And it was a wonderful thing, and see, when I went to that college beforehand, the most profound thing that the college president ever said was, if I don't say hello to you on campus, I'll give you a silver dollar. Ooh, okay, that's profound. So, but yet, from that point, and there was not just myself and these couple of people praying, but there was loads of other Christian, students and staff that were going, God move, God move. We're going to walk around this campus. We want to. We don't rely on ourselves. We rely on you. You move, and God moved. So, but anyway, when you know the guide, you accept the guidance wholeheartedly. So, because Joshua didn't question this, it was bizarre to say the least, but he accepted it. So you know the guide. You accept the guidance, but then you have to act on the guidance. So let's look at these verses here. Joshua 6 through 11, and it says, "Then Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and says to them, take up the ark of the covenant and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. And he said to the people, proceed and march around the city, and let him who is armed advance before the ark of the Lord." And so it was, when Joshua had spoken to the people, that the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of the ram's horns before the Lord advanced and blew the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. And the armed men went before the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard came after the ark, while the priests continued blowing trumpets. Now Joshua commanded the people, "You shall not shout or make any noise with your voice, nor shall a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I say to you, shout, and then you shall shout." So he had the ark of the Lord encircle the city, going around at once, and they came into the camp and lodged in the camp. What's interesting here is that Joshua, God had given him basically the whole plan, but as Joshua is talking and giving instruction, he's not giving it all at once. So he's just telling the people, look, this is what we're going to do today. Don't be saying a word. Just go around. We're going to do this again, and so it's just kind of along the way, just giving them enough information just to do what they needed to do. Now, I'm sure the Israelites were kind of going, this is a bit crazy, because Jericho was a fairly serious edifice. Okay. But well, sure, yeah. So, so you do have armed men. You have armed men before the ark and armed men after the ark, and so the ark's in the middle, which is very significant because God has to be in the middle of things. But you have these walls that are huge. These walls are wide enough to have two chariots running side by side around the entire wall. Now, Jericho is not a huge city, okay, in terms of what we would think as huge cities, okay. I mean, people today would look at Belfast and say, "Oh, that's a big city." Well, on the grand scheme of things, in terms of big cities around the world, Belfast is a town, okay, a village. So I've been in big cities. I've been to New York. I've been to London. I've been. But anyway, Jericho covered around 9 acres. So that's not very big. So how big is your property up your over 100? Okay.
Is it the castle?
Yeah, yes, and that probably would be a fair kind of comparison. It was a tall, yes, yeah, and all that stuff. So yeah, so if you've been to Edinburgh, maybe something like that. So but there was 30-odd thousand people that lived within the walls of Jericho. So that this was a serious place. The people very compactly packed in. So but the problem with people marching around at the base of the wall compared to the people that are up on top of the wall is that gravity prevails. Okay, so if you have spears and you have rocks and you have bows and arrows and all that kind of stuff, shoot down, throw down, and so this whole thing just goes completely against logic. Okay, so but yet the Israelites don't quibble about this. They don't have a problem with it. Why? Because Joshua is convinced about the direction of God, and so he's able to then instill that into the hearts of the people. And Joshua again is a picture of the Lord Jesus Christ. He's our leader. He's the one that gives us this instruction. He's the one that's the commander of the Lord's army. So he's going to place it inside of us exactly what we need to know, and we will feel comfortable with it because we're like, well, it's from God. So so they go ahead and act on it. Right, next few verses here, and then we'll pull a lot of this together a little later on. So verses 12 through 17 says this: Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord, and then 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord went on continually and blew with trumpets, and the armed men went before them, but the rear guard came after the ark of the Lord, while the priests continued blowing trumpets. And the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp, and so they did 6 days. So there's just taking this a day at a time. Now, I think at the same time, if you have 30-odd thousand people living within walls, you have to realize that there are hundreds of thousands of people down below. So now that in and of itself might be a bit scary. So we're within walls, we're contained, we're locked the doors and all that kind of stuff. There's a heck of a lot of people down. So, but it came to pass on the 7th day that they rose early about the dawning of the day and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner. And on that day only they marched around the city 7 times. And the 7th time it happened when the priest blew the trumpets that Joshua says to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." I know it's awful. These little demons in these phones, might be something else that's off. But anyway.
Is an alarm?
And now the city shall be doomed by the Lord to destruction, it and all who are in it. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, as she and all who were with her in the house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. So they're continuing to act on this guidance, but it's just parceled out, little bit by little bit, and then they're given then this instruction, because it hasn't up to this particular stage, the walls haven't come down yet, okay? But they are then given the instruction, look, when this happens, go and get Rahab, okay? Now, if you remember from that story, which we didn't really spend a whole lot of time on talking about her as such, but there was a scarlet cord that was placed in her window so that they all knew, there she is, that kind of stuff, which is a wonderful picture of, again, the scarlet thread of redemption that goes through the Bible, where there's this picture of it wasn't a purple cord, it wasn't blue, it wasn't green or something like this. It was scarlet, so that's a picture of the blood of Christ, that sets you apart, so that you're not doomed to destruction. So now there is, aside from acting on the guidance, there is the details in the guidance. Okay, so let's just look at these last sort of few verses, and then again we'll pull all this together. And it says, you by all means abstain from the accursed things, lest you become accursed when you take of the accursed things and make the camp of Israel a curse and trouble it. But all the silver and gold and vessels of bronze and iron are consecrated to the Lord, and they shall come into the treasury of the Lord. So the people shouted when the priest blew the trumpets, and it happened when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat. And then the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city, and they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, old and young, ox and sheep and donkey, with the edge of the sword. But Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the country, go into the harlot's house, and from there bring out the woman and all that she has, as you swore to her. And the young men who had been the spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all that she had. So they brought out all her relatives and left them outside the camp of Israel. But they burned the city and all that was in it with fire. Only the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. And Joshua spared Rahab the harlot and her father's household and all that she had. So she dwells in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers from Joshua, whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. So now the details of the execution of this guidance is, you see, the stuff that's in the city, don't be taking it. This is not your stuff. Okay, if there's gold, there's silver, there's bronze and iron. Those things are collected and they're brought into the house of God for the treasury there. But do not be taking any stuff for yourself. So now there's other occasions where they went in and took stuff, and that was permitted and that kind of thing. But there is specific instruction about this. And then they were told to go to Rahab's house and go and get her and so on. So, but in verse 20 there, it says, so the people shouted when the priest blew the trumpets, and it happened when the people heard the sound of the trumpet that the people shouted with a great shout. Okay, so here it comes, so we've gone around 6 days, once each day, seventh day, 7 times. On the last lap, Joshua says, shout, because the Lord's giving you the city. And I'm sure the whole people just went in a big, yeah, and so, yay, so, just that would have been a real loud thing, and it says, and the wall fell down flat. Now, the walls didn't fall out. They didn't fall in. They fell straight down. So, and if you go and you look at and Jericho is one of the oldest settlements in the world. Okay, it has been there from a long, thousands and thousands of years. So they've done a lot of excavation in Jericho, and Jericho has been built on top of itself, I don't know how many different times. But anyway, in and around the time as they've determined when this particular event took place, the walls didn't fall out, they didn't fall in, they went straight down into the ground.
And it wasn't.
No. So they and because the walls fell down in that way, it was really easy just to walk in. So the entirety of these walls just went boom. So they didn't have to climb over it.
You would have had rubble.
No,
Oh.
walls fell flat.
They fell flat. They went straight into the ground.
You just
Oh,
put
so
your-
it wasn't rubble.
No.
So
That there would, you know, yeah.
no, it wasn't. There was no rubble at all. They didn't fall out, didn't fall this way, nor did they kind of implode and kind of drop into a big pile. It was like a big solid thing that just went just so but the archaeology confirms that. So only God did that. So then the people went into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. So you have the people that are there outside this wall. Wall goes straight down into the ground, and they just go straight in. There's no clambering around over things and trying to find a little bit of a place to here through a few bricks this way. There's none of that kind of thing. They just go straight in before them. So if the wall fell down here in front of me, I just walk in straight. If it fell down in front of you, you just go right in. Yeah. So I mean, the whole thing is hard to imagine, but that was God's way. So the instruction, the guidance of God, the command of God, worked. Yes. Yeah. And no, and she was a harlot, and she ended up then being in the lineage of Christ. Okay. So because she was it was through her that Boaz came eventually. So but what? Yeah. So, but God did give lots of instruction in the first 5 books of the Bible about how to deal with the foreigner within your gates. So, there was I would say that the people of Jericho were people that were basically not very interested in the things of God at all, and so they were under judgment. Now, again, we look at that, we go, that's harsh, that's rough. Why man, why woman, why young, old, sheep, ox, donkey, everything, but again, I think what these are spiritual lessons about, sometimes when we're going and taking the land, we tend to go, oh, but that's actually good stuff. So we'll save that and we'll utilize it, we'll use it in the things of God, and so we end up borrowing and taking a lot of worldly stuff with us into the spiritual realm of how we operate, but you end up getting interfered with by all that stuff, and so this is why, in the work that I do, Starus actually entertained an idea for some years where we would get counseling training and become counselors. Now, with counseling comes a lot of legislation and requirement and having to adopt certain methods and certain things. You have to be part of certain clubs, the BACP, the British Association of Counselors and Psychotherapists, and all these sorts of things. Now, you look at that stuff and you go, actually, it's not bad. But God was going, don't want you mixed up in that world. Your pastoral cares, your instruction is to bring a message of the gospel to people. God will equip you to sit with people, talk with people, communicate with people, because God knows how to do that. His Spirit who lives in us knows how to do that. So you don't necessarily need some kind of outside piece of framework to get that done. Now, we do live in a world where we do have to, adhere to certain kinds of legislation and framework and stuff, so, like in the church here, if you want to work with kids, you got to get vetted. You have to get into access and here's our man here. He deals with all that stuff. So, you can't thumb your nose at the authorities and say, well, we don't want to do it because we don't think it's biblical. Well, actually, it really is quite biblical because it validates that you're above board, that you're above reproach, so, because God knows there's a lot of people out there who have a lot of stuff to hide. But let's just finish this up here and there we go. With the conclusion. And the leader understood the guidance. Okay, Joshua understood what was going on. He had met God basically on the plains of Jericho, and so he accepted then the guidance that was there. So the leader then relayed the guidance correctly and accurately, but in stages so that the people didn't take the guidance into their own hands. Now, could you imagine if the people of Israel were told absolutely everything? There is a natural tendency to go, that's great, I know how to do this. And then you have people running around thinking that they're their own thing, and they can go and, because, oh, well, I know what the end product is, so I'll go and I'll hasten it along, but sometimes leadership needs to say, no, we're doing things in stages here. We're doing things in a certain kind of way. I heard a man once say there, God will never tell everything about anything, but he'll tell you all you need to know about all you need to know. And I remember learning that as a new Christian. I think I heard that man say that when I was 12.
It's just things we will never heard.
Yes, because God's huge. God is eternal, and so it's not possible for our finite minds to handle everything about anything, really. So, but sometimes we think, oh, I need to know everything in order to understand what to do. No, you don't. God will then tell you what you need to know about all you need to know. So now the ark, which was the presence of God, must always be in the midst of the execution of guidance. And as we said, what was it? The mentioning of the ark of the Lord or the ark of the covenant, or some kind of phraseology like that was mentioned. What was it? 16 times or something, and within those few chapters. So the ark is a very, very important piece. And so God's guidance and commands need to be followed precisely. Detail is important, and that's why God says, look, see the stuff in there? Your natural tendency is want to go and take it. But that's not your stuff, okay? You don't touch it. Don't, just, go and burn it. All right. But again, so often we're looking at things and we go, God, that's an awful waste. Why would you do that? But God's going, no, that stuff is tainted with paganism, and it's been, no, it's not yours. Okay. So don't ask questions. Just don't take it. All right. God knows better. And the promises were kept because the spies were instructed by Joshua to go and find Rahab and get her and take her out. Now it's interesting in the conclusion about that back in the in verse 23, it says, and the young men who had been spies went and brought Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all she had, and they brought out all her relatives and left them outside the camp of Israel. Now, the reason they did that at that particular stage was because they didn't bring them into the camp, was because they were Gentiles. You know, Gentile people were not allowed because they were, quote, unclean people. So they would have had to be ceremonially sorted out and before they were allowed to come into the camp. So, but so that's really running up to the end of chapter 6, which was the whole dealing of Jericho. Next week we'll look at chapter 7, which is then dealing with Ai, which then turns into a big fat problem. And that's because the Israelites thought, thanks God, you took us through Jericho, dead on, super, we can handle it from here. Not dead on. So we'll see how that goes. So
So why, in verse 13, the command of the Lord's army was God.
mhm.
Why he appeared? Because Joshua did know that God was.
Yes,
When God is circumcised and all that.
yeah.
Why did God appear to him?
Well, I think sometimes we do need something quite extraordinary. You know, I think sometimes we do need an encounter. You know, we need a encouragement. You know, and you know, something that's fairly obvious. You know, here's a man who is, I'm the captain of the Lord's army. I'm standing here with the sword. I'm in charge, and we're going to do this. You know, so now I think you're right. Joshua knew the Lord. There's no doubt about that. But I think he needed to know an angle about God that was perhaps, you know, really in your face. You know, really kind of obvious. You know, so
From a purely military point of view, when the Israelites coming out will have no siege engines, they will have no engineers, they couldn't undermine rock. To the average person, there's no way they would have took that city. So maybe God had to appear and say, look, there's no, if you walk around down walls, there's no obvious reason why the walls would go down flat like that. So it was God's complete doing from one end to the other.
mhm.
And it was God making clear to the people that it's not you doing this, it is me doing this, and I'm in charge.
Yeah. So I think really, you know, sometimes we need to know the authority of God, the unwavering authority of God. You know, and I think yes. Yeah. So
You take the big sieges like the Roman siege of Jerusalem, took years. The siege of Masada, just one rock, took 3 years for the Romans to conquer it. And they were specialists. So here's 6 days, a totally untrained army. God used them to take a city.
yeah.
Maybe 2 after 40 years, whenever all the people died, there was a new bunch of people.
Well, yes, and I you know, it was a new crowd. Now it was Joshua that had this encounter with this man. I would say nobody else saw him, but you know, Joshua. I think, you know, probably after 40 years of marching through a wilderness, you know, you do get tired. You know, you just, yeah, and I think your morale within yourself is probably, you know, going, God, I've been doing this for a long time, man. You know, and you know, and saw the Joshua, what I would say Joshua at this stage was probably late 70s or 80s. Yeah. Yeah. So, but now, you know, he still had a lot of energy in himself. He lived till he was 110. But I would say, you know, when you have a lot of new things going on in your life, because there was the crossing of the Jordan, which was substantially different than crossing the Red Sea. It was a different type of transit. The stopping of the manna, that's a big thing. It's like we've been eating this kind of food for 40 years here, and now we're going to be gathering food from the crops of the land. This was a new frontier. Circumcision of all these thousands of men, and they're still kind of smarting from that exercise. They're all kind of going, so. So there's a lot of new things going on, and I think Joshua just needed to know the very strong presence of God being in charge of things. So and I think you're right about encouragement. I think that's the big thing, because we all need encouragement. We all need courage.
Stop at the sea, you say 14 miles.
Yeah.
Jordan shows fantastic. Why do we need?
Because he knew he was coming into a land. The Hittites were one of the great empires of the world. They were military vicious. The children of Israel coming in were totally untrained. So it was given God appeared to show you, look, Joshua, this is not your fight. It's not untrained soldiers fighting trained armies with kings, organized armies. Yeah, but he still was a military commander. I mean, I the night before D-Day took place, 1944, Eisenhower wrote his resignation speech and apologised and recorded it, that things had gone wrong, it was to be published, that he was taking full responsibility. He was an experienced soldier, but he knew things could go wrong. And he had all that prepared. And he had to take an awful gamble, because that night he was given 4 or 5 hours of a window where the weather would change enough to allow the invasion to win. And he had to take the whole gamble of the Second World War on that. And he had to take the decision to do it. Joshua said that, but that's why God came to him and said, look, Joshua, it's not you. I used to wonder about that story too. Well, the more I think about it from a historian point of view, I couldn't have been Joshua if God hadn't come to me and said, look, I'm going to do it for you. I'll do it for you. Just trust me.
Yeah.
So there's times in our own lives, when some of the things look stupid to us, God says, if you trust me, and we do, it seems the right decision.
Yeah. Yes. And history bears that out.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
See, I didn't realize at the start when the way the chapters come in, and I thought when the leader of God's army appeared, it stopped at the end of the chapter. And suddenly then, it was Pastor Taylor actually, he was speaking of, suddenly it clicked on me, that goes into the next chapter.
Yeah.
When he gave the instructions.
When
he told Joshua how to do it.
Yeah.
And suddenly then, it was just like another light coming on.
He told Joshua how to cross the Jordan.
Yes.
Yeah. All. See, God was giving the instruction sort of bit by bit. And God wasn't way out ahead somewhere going, right, okay, here's the 10-year plan. Go and sort it. Now, God did give them the statement of intent, as I called it, which was, you're going to go in and possess the land. That's the general thing. So, but then you needed the pre-planning, the planning, the preparation, the conversations, all that kind of stuff in order to actually get this rolling. And and I would say the land of Canaan was probably, in terms of, like you mentioned, the Hittites and and all the very, very serious, well-established societies and armies and all sorts of things. Really, see them as coming through the wilderness and dealing with the Amalekites and little bits and pieces like that, and the Moabites. Yeah, they were strong enough armies of people, but that was a walk through the park, really, compared to what they're heading up to now. This was big stuff. So Well, yeah,
And,
So-
you know, go back to that point when you're killing the people. It says somewhere else that the cup of the Amorites was not yet full, but now it was full, so God was now in judgment on those people. The
Yeah.
same way as he will be in judgment on this world someday.
Yeah.
You know, someday God is gonna judge this world. And it's gonna be women and children judged too.
Well, he does them in the ark too.